What's up, gang? Today we are going to be covering the hardest areas of every single dungeon in the Season 3 Mythic Plus dungeon pool and how best to deal with them to prevent you guys from bricking those keys or wiping your team, okay? Now, I do just want to clarify that this isn't going to be a dungeon guide per se. We're not going to go over every single mechanic. I will, however, leave a link in the description to my own separate dungeon guides that I've done for this season. But this video is going to be more so those areas in all of these different keys that are going to be wiping your group and then I'm going to teach you guys how best to deal with them and maybe even teach you guys how to carry your team because, hey, we all know what pugging is like out there. So what we'll do then is we'll start with Ara-Kara and slowly work our way through this dungeon and then all of the other dungeons. I'll leave all the timestamps below so you guys can skip to the specific dungeon that you're about to run or whatever. But like I said, we're just going to go through some key areas or key mobs or key bosses in all of these keys and teach you guys how to tackle them. So that being one of the scariest parts of this dungeon, if not the scariest part, is going to be this first pull of the dungeon. Now, you might end up splitting up this pull, but I'm going to teach you guys how to execute this pull for doing the big pull, which you all want to mount up at the start and just run through with your tank. You don't want to touch any of these mobs as you run through, because getting aggro is one of the biggest problems in this first area. If you get aggro, it's gonna mess up your tank, and then, I mean, the mobs are just gonna end up killing you anyway. Your healer's then going to probably try and heal you to prevent you from dying. Your healer's gonna get aggro, then they're gonna die as well. So just leave the mobs alone and let your tank get all the way to the end where the mini boss is to set up this pool nice and perfectly, and then we can start pumping our DPS, okay? We just need to give that our tank a little bit of breathing room. Now, healers, as you set up this pool, as the tank set up this pool, you are going to have to spot heal some players, especially if they get unlucky. You can see that these flyers and crawlers have leapt at this hunter many a time and everyone else is full HP. So give them a few heals. You don't want to rip aggro, like I said. And then also in this area, as a healer, your main job is dispelling. So these crawlers that you can see here, and as you can see once we get into the pack, I'll show you a bit better. But these crawlers here, with the bigger nameplates, I know it's just behind my nameplate, they're going to apply this poison. Now you need to keep on top of dispelling this poison, because this poison got changed coming into Season 3. This can now stack up. It does prefer to apply to players that don't already have the poison debuff, but if you pull enough of these crawlers in, which over this right side, after you've cleared this first pool, there's a lot of crawlers. Tanks, be very careful with how many you pull because the poison can get very overwhelming. But healers, you're going to want to dispel on cooldown because this poison is nasty. It's going to deal a lot of ticking damage and eventually be basically applied to your whole group. So you really want to keep on top of that outgoing damage. And the sooner you fall behind with the spells, the sooner people are going to start getting like 2-3 stacks of this debuff. And that's where it really starts to chunk. If you can't get dispelled, if your healer's already dispelled and you've got a full duration debuff on you, or maybe even 2 stacks, I'd also recommend popping a defensive as the healer themselves or as a DPS. So healers, make sure that you're on top of dispelling here. This is a lot easier if you play with hybrid classes that can also dispel poisons. Chamois are an absolute godsend in this dungeon, so keep that in mind when you're forming your groups for Ara-Kara. So again, letting the tank set up here, I mean, even here, I start pressing my Immolation Aura just to get my Rage Fire ticking, and that's even a little early. I'm lucky that Amarth actually had enough aggro here. And then what you're going to do is, Amarth, you want to kick both of these mobs in, because otherwise they're just going to sit out here casting. So Amarth is going to charge in, and then he's going to use his Disrupting Shout or Challenging Shout to interrupt them both. If you don't have a warrior or like a VDH or a prop pala, then you're going to want to use your range kicks here, or if you've got a DK, grip these mobs in. Now, the rest of this pool is just all about kicks. So you've got these attendants which are going to spam cast Web Bolt. This is an ability that you dump any spare interrupts in, because these mobs, as you can see with this cooldown on the side, are going to cast Resonant Barrage, which deals horrible AoE ticking damage that if the full channel or even a little bit of the channel is left channeling, then you're going to end up wiping. So you need to make sure that you have kicks saved for the resonant barrages from both these attendants. If you want to make this pull a little bit easier, what you could do is, like, I could imprison this attendant out here and we could just pull this one in, because then you're only having to kick the resonant barrage from this. Any spare kicks can go into the web bolts, and then tanks don't kick anything but the Horrifying Shrill from Ixin, okay? So as you can see, we're going to set this up. There goes the Challenging Shout or Disrupting Shout. We bring everything in, pop your Bloodlust, pop your cooldowns, and then it's all about just kicking this Resonant Barrage, as you can see was stopped by the Shockwave. Web bolts are going off, so RT sends his silence into there. The tank is going to kick Horrifying Shrill right here. There you go. I know it's a little bit scuffed on the picture quality. We do unfortunately lose RT here, but all it is from here is dodge the web sprays and keep on top of kicks. Web bolts can go out. In higher keys, you're not really going to want any of them to go out, but Resonant Barrage is the priority kick. Tanks kick the Horrifying Shrill. Healers stay on top of dispelling the poisons that go out from the crawlers, okay? So that is this pool pretty much covered. We'll move on now to this crawler pack. Tanks, be careful with how many of these crawlers that you pull, because as you can see already, we've got 2 stacks on RT here, and that's going to start to chunk him down. And if healers, if you fall behind on dispels, if there's too many crawlers about, then this is going to be really hard to deal with. If you have a Chamois, their Poison Cleansing Totem comes in absolute clutch here. So let's move over now to the first boss, because there's nothing really to cover for the rest of these. These other mini bosses are much easier than that first pool. So let's move on to the first boss. Now, where you want to use your defensives, Alerting Shrill. This ability is the ability that by far hits the hardest. This is going to deal AoE damage to your whole group, so pop a defensive for this. Gossamer Onslaught later also deals party-wide damage, but it's nowhere near as much as this, so make sure you pop a defensive here. On the first one, maybe you won't have to commit one because you've got your cooldowns rolling, and maybe your healer's got their cooldowns rolling. Maybe you even save Bloodlust for this first boss, right? So then the Alerting Shrill goes out. You've used your defensives for it, but the main mechanic for this cast is actually the ads that it spawns. So we want to immediately turn and nuke these down. When these ads are up, they are always your priority. When the boss is very, very low, if he spawns them at the end, you can ignore them and just kill the boss. But for the most part, you're just going to focus down these ads and make sure that you're never dragging them onto the boss, because that's going to cause a wipe. He's going to eat them and then deal increased damage. So as soon as they're up, just swap to them, hard nuke them, and also crowd control to slow them down and give you that extra time to actually kill them off. Then the last ability that I want to touch on for this fight is the Gossamer Onslaught. Now this ability does deal AoE ticking damage, but healers should be able to just pump through this for the most part. But what I want to talk about with this is ideally you want to kind of stack near each other, because every single tick of this cast is going to drop some webs under your feet that stay for a good portion of time. So the neater that you can stack up these puddles, as you can see here, the better, because it's going to leave room for the rest of the fight. So these are all going to expand into puddles that are going to grow a little bit, and then that means that if they're all grouped up here, then you've got all of this space to play for the rest of the fight, right? And if you don't, then you're going to be covering like the whole room, and it's just going to be awkward with getting to the ads later. Then we'll move over to this pool, where you're probably going to pull all of this together, and the main aim of this is to just focus down this Bloodguard. This buff right here is going to reduce the damage taken from all nearby enemies by 50%. So it's like you can cleave here, but basically all of your damage wants to be going into this Bloodguard. They also have a new ability called Locust Swarm, which you'll want to use a defensive for your whole party. It's party-wide damage over the whole channel, and it bloody hurts. So make sure you use the defensive for this one. Then with the Web Mages, spare kicks, again, like at the start of the dungeon, go into Web Bolt, but you want to make sure that you have a kick save for their Revolting Volley. This is going to go off. If this does go off, it's going to deal a large amount of group-wide damage and apply a poison dot to your whole party. It can be dispelled, but there's only one kick mob here, so just make sure that is kicked. Web Bolts can go off in higher keys. They are going to start chunking, but Revolting Volley is the priority kick here. Then moving on, so as you can see, we're focusing down the Bloodguard here. Moving on to the next pool, we've got these Stag Shells. Now they're going to cast Alarm Shrill, as you can see right after this stun is done. But yeah, Alarm Shrill. So if this goes off, it's going to summon a Bloodguard, one of those mobs that we just fought. It's going to just spawn a Bloodguard and also call any mobs within 50 yards to come and help them. So it probably call in these. If this goes off, it's pretty much a wipe, or it's a heavy, heavy time sink. So you can't kick this. Make sure you stop this with hard crowd control like stuns or disorients, and always keep an eye on these mobs, because they're likely not going to be the mob that you focus down. You'll pull them with Bloodguards in a second, so you want to be focusing down the Bloodguard. So just make sure you always have an eye on this, and you need to repeatedly stop it, because once, as you saw, that stun was done from the BM Hunter, it then immediately starts to recast again. We probably don't need to stop this because it's about to die, but there's plenty of these mobs dotted throughout this area, so just always be aware of their alarm shrill cast going off. As you can see here, we got 2 of them, and this one actually normally starts back here. So if you've got a class that can actually push them in with like a Typhoon, as Seb has done here, you've got an Evoker with the pushback from them, a bursting shot from a Hunter. Try and group them up because that's going to make stunning them or disorienting them with AoE CC a lot easier. You're going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, right? But again, just be on top of this with stops because there is now 2 of them. So let's move over to the second boss, a Nubsect then. So for this boss, if you get Burrow Charge, you're going to want to bait this. Normally, I think this goes on range. I think it actually might go on the furthest player away from the boss, so you can bait this. And also, if you have a quick movement effect, like a disengage, a blink, or something of the sorts, a fell rush, like on me, if you stay far enough away from this boss, after the cast finishes, as he charges towards you, everyone else will want to dodge here. As he charges towards you, right now, this Hunter could disengage. He might even do it. There you go, disengage, out of the way, doesn't even get hit by it. If you have no way to get out of this mechanic and it's going to hit you, then just use a defensive and get hit by it. You want to try and bait it like into a nearby wall because you saw how much downtime we lost then with having to chase it across the room. So try and bait it into a nearby wall if you can to lower the distance that it charges, right? I have the swarm coming up here, so tanks, what you want to try and do is stand on the right side of this circle. Everyone else stands on the left side as it kind of patrols around because the tank is going to get impaled here in a second. And it's always, this ability is always baited on the tank in this phase. So as you can see, Amarth is stood on the right hand side here, and then a very small portion of the circle is actually taken up by the impale. If the tank was stood central here, then it would cover the whole area pretty much, and it would make dodging a lot harder. Outside of this, you're going to have Infestation go out on players, which is about to be placed on me right now. This is a heavy hitting dot. As you can see, I think it's a 5-second dot. This trucks and then also leaves one of these swirlies behind after it expires. Use a defensive when you get Infestation. As a Havoc Demon Hunter, I can maybe get away with not pressing anything because of the leech I've got. There you go, I press blur. But Infestation is pretty much the only real thing that you need to use a defensive for in this fight. So just make sure you use that and try and place the swirly in a nice place if you're aware of when it's about to fall off. But don't worry about it too much if that's too much brain power. So that is a Nubsect done. Then in this final area, you're going to have these Blood Overseers. These are your priority kill mobs, but they're also your priority kick mobs. They're going to do this Venom Volley. Again, just a nasty AoE nuke on your party, so make sure that is kicked. It can be dispelled if it goes off, but it just shouldn't go off. Be careful with aggro as you're setting up here. And if any of your friends get trapped by the Black Blood, when they step into these puddles, they're going to get rooted, which can be very, very deadly with the erupting webs that are about to go off here. So if you see anyone rooted at this point, just make sure to use some AoE CC. You can kick them, you can use any form of CC to stop the Black Blood from rooting that player, and then because if they were stood in these erupting webs, they would then die. Healers, be very on top of dispelling here. These drones, I think it is, are going to apply a nasty stacking debuff to the tank, which is going to... The most important part of it is that it reduces your movement speed and it stacks. So at some points, the tank is just going to become immobile. So healers, keep on top of dispelling here around between 10 to 15 stacks. Your tank might have something else to say about that. Again, you can use freedom-like effects as well, like Blessings of Freedom, Tiger's Lust, from other players in your team as well. But for the most part, dispel your tanks around 10 to 15 stacks. Some tanks do have a better time with movement, right? Like a VDH is going to be able to Infernal Strike out of these puddles without issue, right? So maybe talk with your tank before the key, but around 10 to 15 stacks is normally a good shout. So let's move over to the last boss then. We have Kikatal the Harvester. Now, I'm sure, like I said, this isn't a dungeon guide, but these mobs around the room that run around, just literally, they have such small HP, so they just need to be killed off because they're going to also drop this Black Blood. As you see, they have a debuff here. That's going to die there, drop that pool, which you're going to stand in for the Cosmic Singularity. If you don't know the mechanics of all these fights and these mobs and bosses, then check out my dungeon guides. But I thought I would just place an emphasis on that, because there is a lot of times where there's nowhere near enough black blood pools ready for that cosmic singularity and people end up dying. So always keep in the back of your head that you need to be killing off these ads to drop these pools to stand in later. Then as cultivated poisons goes out, this is now only applied to 3 players. Healers, you'll want to dispel the squishiest player first and then leave the debuff active on the other 2 players. The other 2 players should use a defensive. The tank's probably not going to need to use a defensive, but this debuff does hurt. So if it's left on you, as you can see here, I think I pop blur as it's dispelled. Oh, okay, so it's left on me, so I pop blur, right? And then obviously just watch for the waves as it's dispelled or as it expires. Don't be running around while it's still on you and it's about to fall off, because you might get somebody killed if they can't like anticipate your movement, right? But healers, maybe also rotate your dispels as well. Like if I'm not dispelled this time, then Seb should dispel me on the next one, because he knows that I probably committed a defensive to the one that I just had, right? And then the other people that got dispelled instantly will hopefully still have their defensives and they can commit it to later cultivated poisons. This again is a lot easier when playing with a shaman. Shamans do really help this dungeon purely because of their poison cleansing totem. So keep that in mind when you're making your groups. And that is Ara-Kara. That's all the tips and tricks for all the hardest areas of Ara-Kara. So let's move on to Priory of the Sacred Flame then. Again, at the start here, you're likely going to do a big pull to get your Bloodlust on cooldown, and the exact same goes at the start of Ara-Kara as it does here. Don't touch any of the mobs while the tank is gathering them. The tank is going to want to gather all of these mobs that he's pulled into this corner. We'll get onto why later, but just do not touch any of these mobs, because if you get aggro, it's just going to mess up the setup of this pool completely and maybe cause a wipe. Okay, so just hold your horses, DPS. That is the name of the game here. So the reason that you want to pull into this corner is because of Guard Captain Sullyman. So the tank is going to get knocked back by this shield slam, but if he's in this corner, he's only going to get knocked back a short distance straight into this wall, right? So if he was out here just in the open, he's going to get knocked back, and then all the mobs aren't going to be grouped up. It's going to be much harder to cleave them down and efficiently CC them as well. Now, my recommendation here is to actually focus down this knight. We do have 2 priority kill mobs, as shown by my plates profile, free by the way, in the description. But my priority kill target is always the knight. He does an AoE disrupting shout, which interrupts any spell casting, so make sure that you're not spell casting, especially healers. You don't want to get caught out here. Also, though, use a defensive for this disrupting shout, because it does hit the whole party very hard. And you'll also want to commit a defensive, as you can see here, to the impale. He's going to target a random player and place a bleed on them for, I think it's 12 seconds now, and that is going to really hurt, especially at the same time as like other damage is going out from the disrupting shouts and the pot shots from the sharpshooter. So defensives on disrupting shout and defensives on impales as well, okay? And then focus down this knight, kill it off ASAP. As this pull is stacked up as well, ranged, you're going to want to stack in melee, because these sharpshooters are going to drop their caltrops, which we'll hopefully see in a second. But before they do it, they leap to a random player's location or like nearby, right? So if my range was stood out here, the sharpshooter's going to jump out here potentially, and then it's just not going to get cleaved down. So we want everything stacked on top of each other. Pop lust, pop all your cooldowns, pop defensive cooldowns for this disrupting shout that's about to go off, and just nuke everything down as fast as you can, right? When these footmen get to around 50% HP, they're going to cast Defend. As you saw then, my plate turns the nameplates grey when this is going off, so you know that you need to stop. Use AoE CC when they cast Defend. This is also going to increase the damage they take once it's stopped, so make sure that these are stopped so that you can efficiently cleave down this whole pack. But you'll want to save your crowd control until this point, right? There's nothing else to really stop in this pool, so make sure you're saving your stuns, your disorients, whatever it is, for after the footmans get below 50% health, because they don't cast it above it. So moving on to this second pool, I mean, we go kind of huge for this second pool as well. You don't necessarily need to do all this. I mean, it is only footmen, to be fair, but you're going to focus down chainmail. If you get targeted by the lunging strike, then you're going to use a defensive, but also it's an AoE around the targeted player. She's going to leap someone and do an AoE there, so don't stack up here. Loosely spread so that you don't get the bleed on multiple people. You can use movement buffs, movement speed abilities like Disengage, Wild Charge, Blink. If you're lucky and you kind of anticipate it going on you and you use it before she actually reaches your location, you can get out of the bleed. So that's just something to note. And then the only other thing with this pool is these Conjurers and Priests. These are going to be priority kick mobs. The Conjurer more so at the beginning. You're going to want to interrupt their Fireball. This is going to hit harder than the Holy Smite. But ideally, both of these abilities are always kicked. But Fireball is your priority kick here. And then once the Priest gets low, or any other mobs get low, the Priest is then going to cast Greater Heal. And that's going to heal the targeted... There you go, Greater Heal there. So you're going to want to kick this. I think I'm about to kick it right now. But this is going to heal a random ally for 50% of their health. So we do not want this going off at all. So make sure that this is kicked and Fireball is kicked as a priority. Holy Smites can go through, but again, in those higher keys, they are going to hurt. So I didn't kick it. RIP. That's my bad. So that's this first area covered. Let's move over to High Priest Amia then. Again, you're going to do a big pull here. CC the Footman once they're at 50% HP. Kick her Holy Smite because it's the only kick in this area. And once her Reflective Shield goes off, some classes have a harder time with this than others. But this is going to reflect 70% of the incoming damage back at you. So pop your defensives. If you've got a lot of damage here, just be careful. Like sometimes you might need to slow your horses so that you don't end up killing yourself, right? But pop a defensive if you do have a lot of damage, because ultimately you do need to break this shield with damage, right? And it does get broken pretty quickly, but as you can see, I think Artie just one-shot himself there. It seems like priests have a really hard time with this, but if I was to start taking lots of damage, I'd be popping Blur right now, but it seems like we're okay for the most part, and then the shield is broken. So that's how to deal with High Priest Amia. If you went right and you're playing Forge Master Damien instead, then you simply just want to use a defensive for the Heat Wave when that goes off, because that is going to apply a nasty dot to your whole group, and also dodge the swirlies from that. And then tanks be very ready with mitigation for when the Seal of Flame buff is active on Forge Master Damien. But let's move over to the first boss then. Now, this has actually had some changes. So instead of the Hell Spear Frontals, which was super easy to dodge, it's now going to be this Earth Shattering Spear. So just make sure that whoever is targeted by this and everybody else gets out of this. Oh, it went for Savage Mauling first. So if you're targeted by Savage Mauling, use a defensive, and other DPS just burst through the shield to stop the Savage Mauling from going off. Then straight after that, we're going to kick the Battle Cry right there. And then if you've got Ember Lance on the boss, healers, you're going to want to dispel the tank whenever Divine Judgment goes off, but the rest of your party is going to... So Divine Judgment coming through here. Healers, just dispel that ASAP. Insta dispel from Seb, very nice. Then this Holy Radiance is going to deal AoE ticking damage for the whole channel to your whole party. Use a defensive when this goes off. If you're in cooldowns, then maybe you won't need to. If healers are able, like as you can see, Seb is keeping on top of this damage very nicely. But as a general rule, just use defensives for Holy Radiance, because that is the only real scary outgoing damage. And then lastly, that Pierce Armor that just went off, especially when combined with this, it's so important that this Divine Judgment is dispelled ASAP. The Pierce Armor is going to do heavy upfront damage, so tanks use a big defensive for this, because the bleed is also horrid as well, and that is going to chunk you down. So make sure you've got big mitigation while that bleed is active to prevent you from dying. This is a big, big tank check. So let's move over to another scary pull down, which is straight after this. We're going to probably have Lust back, so we're going to do a big pull here with multiple Paladins. Now, these Paladins are going to do an AoE Sacred Toll. It's going to deal large AoE damage to your whole group, and they do it in a staggered fashion. So as you can see, we've got 4 Paladins here, which is pretty much a death sentence. I would not recommend doing this for you guys, especially in pugs. But basically, use defensives for Sacred Tolls. What I'll normally do is let the first one go off without a defensive, as long as the key is low enough that you won't die from it. Healers, you need to be on top of your burst healing in between these Sacred Tolls going off, because one of them's going to go off here. So I let this go off. I mean, I do actually blur that. I guess blur is going to be active for a few of them. Then, as you can see, we've got like 1 or 2 seconds where Seb needs to heal himself back up in between this next Sacred Toll going off, which hits us again. Then we've got another one going off, but Seb's already on top of it. He's obviously fully ramped into this. And then we've got one final one going off. Now, that is the first round of those going off for this pull. We might kill them because it's like a lowish key. We might kill them before the next ones, but just make sure that you're super on top of your defensives here, as to not get hit by the next one and then just die. Because if you take one and don't really receive any healing, it is a lot on the healer for this, but you're also going to want to help them out with the defensive so that they can heal up that damage quicker in between. The other very scary part of this is if you're pulling priests or conjurers at the same time. Again, much like earlier, we'll see in this next pull that we do, we've got a conjurer. So again, like I said earlier, the fireballs are a very high priority kick, but now also the holy smites from the priests are a priority kick as well, because if any of these have bad overlaps with the sacred tolls, somebody's just going to die. There should only be like a few kicks here. We do have an extra priest in here, as I've already said. We did go a bit balls to the wall here, so we're kind of pulling a lot at the same time, but you don't want any of these abilities going off. You can let them go off if you don't see the sacred toll going off at the same time, but that's sometimes hard to keep an eye on top of all of that. So just make sure that these mobs are kicked, CC'd, AoE CC'd, whatever it is. Sacred toll going out here, so I use blur for that. Blur's already active, and then there'll be another one that is followed by this other paladin. So healers, just make sure you're on top of the healing in between these sacred tolls going off. Let's move over to the second boss. Then we've got Brawn Pike. Hammer of Purity. All you're going to want to do is stack on one side of the room as a team, and as soon as that goes out, you then go and play the boss on the other side of the room until that Hammer of Purity, and then you go back and forth between that. Sacrificial Pyre is about to go out. This needs soaking, and it's going to apply a dot to whoever soaks it. It's going to hurt, but the biggest thing here is do not soak this at all until this Castigator's shield has gone out, because that is going to hit the whole team with a hefty chunk of party damage. So if people already had dots here, or if someone was soaking at the same time, very likely to kill someone. So wait until that goes out, let your healer recover from that burst damage, and then go and soak these pools. I mean, the Evoker was a little bit early there, even there, to be fair. As you can see, he got very low. In a high key, he's probably just dead. You have a lot of time with those pyres, so just allow that time for your healer to get back on top of things, right? And then tanks, when the boss buffs itself with Vindictive Wrath, sorry, just be prepared with defensives, because he does actually start to slap the tank here a little bit. So that's that for that boss. Let's move over to this final area then. It's all kind of the same mechanics here, but this mage. Kick this mage's fireballs, but more importantly, make sure that you save a kick for the fireball volley right there. That is going to one-shot your group pretty much. It's an AoE nuke to your whole group, so just make sure that does not go off. You also have light spawns here. They're going to target a player with Purification, which is a single target nuke of a channel. If you're targeted by that, use a defensive. And once they get to 25% HP, they're going to do a burst of light, which will heal any mobs within that circle. So as the mob is getting low, tanks preemptively start moving the rest of the pack out so that they don't get healed. Then moving over to the middle, we've got Sir Brawn Pike, which is the last mini-boss. Tanks, be very wary with his Blazing Strike. That's going to do a large chunk of damage, so use defensives. And he's also going to pulse horrible AoE damage for the whole time he is alive. So healers commit healing cooldowns here. DPS and healers use defensives, use like AoE defensives, like I could drop a darkness here, it's already on cooldown, but just be on top of your defensives here, and also like your health pots as well, so that you don't tick out to this outgoing damage. Make sure that these mobs are always kicked as well, because that's very likely to end in a death if their casts do go off at the same time as the ticking damage goes out. And the final part of this area is these footmen. When they die, they're going to explode for AoE damage, so just stagger their deaths as they're approaching low HP here. Just try and kill them off in a staggered fashion, as to not just one-shot your group by killing like 4 or 5 of them at once. So that's that then. Let's move over to Prioress Murpray. So when Inner Fire is active, she places a buff on herself, which is going to just pulse out damage. While that is active, be prepared with defensives, especially when Blinding Light goes off. Now, when Blinding Light goes off, just turn your back at the end of the cast. But if Inner Fire is active at the same time, perhaps pop a defensive if you start ticking low. But healers keep on top of that ticking damage. Healers can also dispel the Blinding Light if somebody does face towards the boss and get disoriented by it. So just keep that in mind. And then once she gets to 50% HP, she's going to teleport up to the top. All of these ads are going to come up, and as you can see, they're taking ticking damage. So try and CC them out here, because these ads don't have an aggro table. So you need to be very, very careful. If they come up to the top, I might even die here. I can't actually remember. But as they come up to the top, nuke them down with AoE damage, but also nuke the hard crowd control them with AoE CC as well. Like we got a Vortex here. They will just tick out to the boss's damage. So if you can CC them down here with like roots or vortexes, that is ideal. If not, be very careful when they get up here. Be ready with defensives. Like if I had blur here, that would be huge, because I'd probably dodge a lot of them attacks, but just nuke them down. Make sure they die. See, I died. See, there we go. So I guess I could have Sigil of Misery down there. So just make sure you're very careful. And if it's looking like you don't have much CC and you're going to die, then maybe just come back here and let your range finish them off as a melee, because it's not worth the death, right? So that is Priory of the Sacred Flame done. Let's move over to Dawnbreaker. So at the start here, you're going to do this. I mean, this is a big pull for Dawnbreaker, right? So Tormenting Ray is going out on me, so I want to use a defensive. Tormenting Ray slaps and it hits 2 players. So if you're targeted by this, make sure to use a defensive. Make sure you're kicking as well, like this Nightbolt going out at the same time as the Tormenting Ray. I think T might actually die here. Oh, he got healed up in time. Very, very nice. But Nightbolt is the only thing that you need to kick here, so stay on top of kicks for Nightbolt. Healers will want to dispel the Ensnaring Shadow if they can, and also like mages, this is a curse, so make sure that is dispelled. And also healers, make sure you're dispelling the Stygian Seed pretty much as soon as you can. There we go, dispelled. So that is that first pull done. Moving on to the next, we've got this commander. Tanks use big mitigation for this Tainted Slash. It's going to hurt and leave a nasty dot on you, so just make sure you've got big mitigation out for that. And healers, be prepared with spot healing on that too. Let's move over to the next ship. Did I miss that? No, okay, we got Bursting Cocoon coming out now. If you're targeted by Bursting Cocoon, spread away from the rest of your team, as you see Artie did here. And also make sure to use a defensive, because once it explodes and expires, it's going to deal a lot of damage to anyone in that circle. So again, stay spread out. Jumping over to the first boss then, tanks. This Obsidian Beam is a big old tank buster, so use defensives for this Obsidian Beam going out. And also, later in the fight, she's going to place these collapsing night puddles, as you can see on the edges of the screen. Thanks, as you can see that Burak's done here, you want to pull the boss away from these pools, because if there was no room on the other side of this beam, then whoever would be in this zone as the beam rotates would get trapped and either have to go into the collapsing night puddle or just get one shot by the beam. So make sure the boss is positioned away from these puddles in anticipation for the Obsidian Beam coming out. She can be quite difficult to get out because you need to kick her shadow bolts. Sometimes she just stands in these puddles. So just have your whole group on top of kicks here, ready to pre-position her for this Obsidian Beam going out. And then she's going to cast Burning Shadows. Healers dispel this ASAP on the targeted player, so it's on Seb here. So he's going to dispel that. That's going to apply Healing Absorb to your whole group. Now, if she's so healers out heal this, and also DPS use self-healing defenses if you have them to get rid of this, because it's also going to do ticking damage to you. But if she hits 50%, she'll then cast Darkness Comes, which means you have to fly away from her to not get one shot by the big sort of void zone. If she does a Burning Shadows just before that and everybody still has this debuff while she casts the Darkness Comes at 50%, stay on the ship to allow your healer to get rid of this debuff before you actually fly off, because otherwise you're going to be flying off with this debuff active and it's going to deal ticking damage to you and kill you while you're flying about. So if you're unlucky with that overlap, just make sure you stay on the ship. Don't panic. The Darkness Comes has a lot of time before the cast actually finishes. So just allow your healers to recover this Healing Absorb before you fly off and get yourself killed. Over to the second area then. Now, I actually think that these Shadow Walkers are your priority kill mob, because they apply a nasty debuff to the tank that's going to reduce their healing and do extra damage. So that can definitely end up killing your tank. So I think the Shadow Walkers are now your prio kill mob. Kick the Night Bolts from the Shadow Mages, but these Dark Casters are going to cast a Tormenting Beam, which now actually trucks. So make sure that you have a kick save for Tormenting Beam. There's sometimes quite a few of these Dark Casters in one pack, so make sure that these abilities are kicked. As you can see, I AoE stun that with my meta. And like I've mentioned, kill off these Shadow Walkers, but tanks, just be careful with this debuff that they apply. It can easily get you killed. So if it's stacking up, it has a very short duration, this debuff. So Burak could use a Ring of Peace and just sit inside the Ring of Peace for a second to recover and then allow himself to receive some more stacks. But just use CC and Kite if you need to actually get rid of these stacks, because it can prove very, very fatal. Now, let's move on to the mini-bosses. There's not a whole lot to cover with these mini-bosses. If you're targeted by this Abyssal Blast that is going to come out every so often, all of these mini-bosses do this. If you're targeted by this, use a defensive. It slaps. Especially as we skip over to Death Screamer Ikentak, who does this Dark Orb. So she sends out this Dark Orb. I'm sure you guys know how this mechanic works, but it explodes once the Dark Orb hits something. The further away it explodes, the less damage it deals. But if you have the Abyssal Blast on you at the same time, which I think I get right now, yeah, so that's on me, I want to use the defensive here. I've used the defensive anyway because Abyssal Blast is just scary by itself, but with the overlap, that Abyssal Blast is going to deal a lot of damage to me, a lot of ticking damage, so I want to reduce the damage from that as much as I can, because when that orb explodes, if I was already low here, then I am toast, right? So that's a very scary overlap if you get Abyssal Blast at the same time as the Dark Orb going out, so just be careful and make sure to use defensives for that overlap specifically. The other mini boss does Shadow Decay, which doesn't really do all that much damage anymore, but it is an AoE party-wide damage, so if you're already low, use a defensive. I mean, I guess I could recommend to use defensives here, especially on higher keys. But as you can see, I have no defensives here, and Seb just keeps on top of the outgoing damage with his healing. So let's move over to the second boss then. So Dark Orb, we want to fire down this path so that it explodes as far away as possible. There is a very scary overlap later with Shadow Decay, as shown here. So that is going to fire out. As this travels, she's then going to cast Shadow Decay, hopefully. Come on, there we go. And as this is ticking on our whole group, it's then going to pop the Dark Orb. So if you're already low from this Shadowy Decay, then it's going to end up one-shotting you. As you can see just there, I'll replay it and go again. The Dark Orb actually pops before the Shadowy Decay comes out. So if that was to pop for a lot more damage in a higher key, this is only a 12, then we're all going to be 40, like 30% maybe, and then these first takes of Shadowy Decay are very likely to kill us. So I should have used a defensive there. I did end up using a defensive for the Shadowy Decay, but I should have also mitigated the Dark Orb damage. So that is the second boss done. Make sure that you AoE CC and don't let these Congealed Darkness casts go off once the ads are spawned. Then for the last mini boss, when targeted by Tormenting Eruption and in anticipation for it, make sure you're spread out, especially in melee. And then also make sure to use a defensive for it. As you can see, we were overlapped for a second and that almost got us both killed. So use a defensive for that and make sure to kick the ads in once they're spawned and cleave them down. And then for the last boss, make sure that all the barrels are dropped on top of the boss, and then just make sure to use defensives for this erosive spray because the dot actually does kind of truck. So as you can see, I popped a blur. But that's pretty much it for Dawnbreaker. So let's move over to Floodgate. So Floodgate then, we're going to do a big pull at the start as we do in a lot of these dungeons. So let the tank gather here. Don't get too hasty with your DPS. Focus the Shrednators down and be ready to move for their shredation. So you don't get caught by that, like move in anticipation for it and also dodge the beam. The other things you want to look out for in this first pull is kicking the surveying beam from the surveyors, because that's going to nuke down the targeted player and end up killing them. And also, if you get two of these easy throw dynamite on you at the same time, use a defensive. There's very helpful weak auras out there that will show you if you're being targeted by more than one. But if you get targeted by two easy throw dynamites at the same time as some other minor damage going out, then you might likely die to that. Also, with these loader bots that come in later, they're going to do a wind up. So just make sure that wait until after the cast starts before you AoE CC. I got too hasty with my Chaos Nova there and did it before. But after that is started, you then want to use your AoE CC to stop that ability and make it go on cooldown. And melee, just be very, very careful with your positioning as to not get chunked down by them, because those wind-ups do hurt. As we head over to the Demolition Duo then, these divers are going to cast Harpoon. Now this is a very scary pull because of how many kicks there are, but you can kick these Harpoons because they're going to drag that player in and put a horrible bleed on that player. So these need to be stopped, especially because of these bombs that they place here, because if you get harpooned through that bomb, it's going to trigger the bomb and just one-shot you. So make sure that these harpoons are stopped with AoE CC, kicks, and all that good stuff. I really wouldn't recommend pulling as much as we do here. What you'll likely do, to be honest, is probably end up pulling these two divers here onto this pool where the Architect originally is. As you can see, these divers patrol over, so you'll likely just have to deal with two kicks there. I really wouldn't recommend doing this pool that we do right here. Moving over to our first boss then, which is the Demolition Duo. Healers, there is actually a lot of chip damage that goes out in this fight from these quick shots, as you can see is going out here. So just make sure you're staying on top of that with your healing. because that, especially with other mechanics, can definitely get out of hand, and even just getting 2 quick shots back to back in a high key can be the end of you. So healers, just stay on top of that outgoing damage. And then when this kinetic explosive gel goes out, whoever is targeted by that obviously needs to run towards as many bombs as they can. But you want to use a defensive for when this gets dispelled off you, because it does actually a considerable amount of damage. Like, that's through shields right there. I know you can't really see that, which was annoying, but he went down to like 70% HP. So use a defensive for that and don't stand in the barreling charge as I just did. Moving over to Big Mama then. Now you might pull some additional adds on top of this, as we're about to do here. But focus down these adds. I mean, that is just a mechanic that we all know how to do, right? And also make sure that they are kicked on their maximum distortion whenever that goes off, because that's going to push your whole party back at the same time as dealing a horrible AoE damage. So you would kick that here. Sonic Boom, make sure that you kind of stay on the line that the boss is firing it at you. Don't be moving from side to side, but you want to get back and away from the boss so that you can actually dodge it. So I just fell rush through it. Use the movement speed ability to get around that. It makes it much more trivial. Tanks, you'll want to use a big defensive for this Electro Crush, especially if you don't deal with magic damage very well. So just make sure that that is mitigated nicely, because that also is going to leave a dot on you. And then once you get into the jumpstart phase, pop offensive and defensive cooldowns. It's going to deal some large AoE ticking damage, but the boss is also going to take increased damage here. So make sure that you have big cooldowns ready to fire here. I mean, it's kind of tricky because you also want to make sure you kill the adds, and you're likely going to need to commit offensive cooldowns to kill off the adds in time before the killer block barrier goes out. But you want to also save a bit of damage at least for those jump starts. So let's move on to the pack upstairs then. So these blood warpers that we're going to face are going to do a blood blast on the tank, which you need to kick, and then this warp blood AoE channel to the whole group, which is going to deal damage but also apply a healing absorb. So make sure to use defenses for that. As you can see, I dropped to darkness. Use any self-healing defenses for that. Make sure to stay away from these wind-ups and stop them, as I just did, and then kick the blood blast when they go out on the tank. Then after that, you've got the Jettison Kelp channel from these Disturbed Kelp. Make sure that this is stopped, and also pop defensives if you can't stop them and multiple of them are going off, because this does truck your whole group, as you can see. So we Psychic Screamed that. I think I also overlapped with my AoE stun there, but kick the Restorative Algae and just make sure to use CC hard crowd control to stop those Jettison Kelp channels from killing off your whole group. Then on to Swamp Face. So you're going to get attached, so you obviously want to stay near your tethered player the whole time and dodge the mudslide. Now, regardless of how easy it is for you to dodge right, I'm just always going to recommend going left. If we just keep that as a general rule in the community that we're always going to dodge left, I didn't even need to dodge that because it was baited very nicely, then we're going to have no problems. If people go right and some people go left, then we're going to get yanked into the middle and die. Then healers, be ready for the Awaken the Swamp cast. Make sure that everybody is topped. These vines are going to deal ticking damage throughout the whole fight, so make sure that you've out-healed this outgoing damage ready for Awaken the Swamp, and then everybody should pop defensives for Awaken the Swamp, because it does hit your whole party like a truck. And if you're already low from the vines, then it's very likely to kill you. So healers, make sure that everybody is healthy going into this cast, okay? Then tanks, use big mitigation for the sludge claws. Healers, be ready to spot heal, but I mean, maybe the tank won't need it. You're going to need to judge that based on the tank that you have, right? But that is Swamp Face, so let's head over to the last area then. These electricians are your priority kick. Make sure that their lightning bolts are always kicked. They deal a large chunk of damage, and it's the only kick in here, so make sure they're kicked. Healers, make sure to keep on top of the dispels of overcharge. This is going to stun the player if they sit the whole debuff, and if there's 2 electricians, this can get out of hand pretty quickly. So just make sure that you're dispelling pretty much off of cooldown here to make sure that nobody gets stunned, because if you also pull with a jump starter, then they're going to spawn these swirlies around the room. So if somebody gets stunned and then these swirlies go out, they're just going to die to that, okay? Tanks, also be ready with these jump starters to use defensives for Spark Slam, especially when you're putting 2 of these at the end, because if they overlap, that is going to deal a large chunk of damage to you. So just make sure it's mitigated properly. Then on the last boss, use minor defensives if you can for the turbocharge channel while you're dodging all of the lines, because this does actually chunk you quite a bit. So just, yeah, make sure, I mean, I don't really need to as a demon hunter because I just leech through it. But this can actually hurt during this phase. If you're targeted by Gigazap, as you can see here, then just make sure to use a defensive and don't stand on near any pools. This is the largest damage that goes out during this fight, so this is where you want to commit a defensive. And then, as you can see, we've got one pool nearby here. So the Leaping Sparks are about to come out. Let the tank use this nearby pool. Don't drag your Leaping Spark. I know it's tempting, but don't drag your Leaping Spark through the pool that's nearest to this console, because after the Leaping Sparks have gone out, the tank will hopefully be able to stop his fixate here. And then after that, the Thunder Punch will come out. But if the tank's all the way over here, then he can't really use the console reliably. Tanks, you want to generally use this console for the Thunder Punch because it also has a heavy knockback on it. So you'll just get knocked back into this console, and then melee can keep up time on the boss, and it also stops you getting like knocked off the edge or anything like that, as you can see there. See, barely a knockback, and just mitigate that Thunder Punch as well. So that is Floodgate done. Let's move over to Gambit. Right, so Gambit, again, big pull at the start. Let your tank get aggro on everything. You're going to focus down this Goliath in the back. Now, tanks, you're going to want to be careful as to not pull too many Scale Binders. These are the guys that are going to spawn the Invigorating Fish Sticks. And whenever a Fish Stick is spawned, everyone needs to swap to the Fish Sticks to nuke them down and kill them off, because it's going to reduce all the Murloc's damage taken by a hefty amount and also heal them for a massive amount as well. So as you can see, it is now an instant cast, so you just need, this is from the PTR, so you just need to focus down at the Fish Sticks as they spawn. Now, you do want to kick these water bolts when they go off. These water bolts are scary, especially if you pull a lot at the same time and they overlap on one person. But I would argue your main priority kick in this area is from these Shell Crushers. They're going to do Shell Crush on the tank. That's kind of irrelevant. But they're going to do Cry of Gurg or something. I don't know how to say it, okay? But if that cast goes off, if he will eventually cast it, there we go. If this cast goes off, it's going to increase the damage of all nearby Murlocs by 50%. And that is going to then make your water bolts the priority kick. So just don't let this go off and send any spare kicks into the water bolt, okay? Also, be very careful when fighting these Fishmancers. They're going to throw a volatile pufferfish on the floor marked by these blue swirlies. If these blue swirlies are inside these, inside or under the water, they can be very hard to see. So I would recommend to just fight on the land wherever you can here. But just always keep an eye out. If you are stood in the water for whatever reason, like I am here, just keep an eye on your toes. Like, be very, very aware of your surroundings, because they can almost be pretty much invisible if you're stood in the water. So that's the first area done. Maybe use defensives for the Tidal Stomp from the Goliaths if you're already low. But let's move over to the first boss now. So if you're targeted by this Purge by Fire beam, as you can see, Artie is here. Do not underestimate this beam. It actually does damage. Although the beam is kind of like delayed and like following where the circle is, the circle is what actually does the damage. So get a good distance away from it, like Artie has here. Because what I've been guilty of before is thinking, oh, it's just placing this void zone on the floor and that's all that's going to do the damage. No, the circle is what actually deals the damage, and it will kill you very, very quickly. Also, don't kite this beam through the middle, because we need to use this space for later when we pick up the orbs. So try and just like kite it out to the side, like maybe down the line here. Then when the ads are spawned, immediately swap and hard nuke these ads down. They're going to start with an empowered defense system channel, which can only be stopped by hard crowd control. So let that go off and then stop it after with like a stun or a disorient from like a blinding light or something. Then after they've completed that cast, you can just stop it over and over. They're then going to cast Valorous Bolt. This can be kicked, so just make sure that these are kicked, especially if there's still 2 up, because this does actually chunk for a large amount of damage. So that's Hilbrand. That's the fight there. Let's move on to these few pulls after. These deckhands are going to cast Super Sizon, which is going to increase their damage by a hell of a lot, and it can actually be stopped with hard crowd control. Or not stopped, but delayed, because once you stop it with hard crowd control, they're going to immediately recast it. So if you can be coordinated with your crowd control here, you can just stop it over and over again, because this cast will make these mobs a big problem for your tank. If it does go off, tanks just make sure to kite, and then also everyone else should just make sure to kick these brackish bolts that are going to be going on the tank. Tanks, this is an area for you, okay? Be very careful here. So that is pretty much it until the second boss. Now with this second boss, this is a lot about positioning. So what you want to do is start by tanking it in this corner if you can. So you're going to have the tank come all the way up to this corner. And then the idea here is there's going to be cannon fire barrage, which is going to paint the ground in fire swirlies, right? So you're going to eventually be denied access to this area. So you want to then kite the boss down this coastline. And then after you've kind of got to the end of that, you're going to want to come back up to here. So you're going to traverse down, then you're going to come back up and then traverse down again all along this beach side to save as much room as you can. And also note that the further back the boss is, like towards this wall, it's going to make hitting the adds with the frontal infinite breath a lot easier because the cone obviously goes out, right? So it's going to be like, as you can see here, it makes it just a lot easier to hit all of these adds because there's so much more room for the adds to be inside, right? So I hope that makes sense. That is the best way to do it. Then the cannon fire barrage comes in, which is going to deny us access to that area. So we're going to come down a bit, do it from here instead. And then eventually we're going to go back up to this top area to save the room. This isn't just a tank job though. You do also need your whole team to be on it with their crowd control and also their positioning, because you want to make it as easy as possible to get these adds inside. So as you can see here, we got a vortex on the mobs. I could use like a sigil of misery to like root them for a second, and then I don't know. So Seb's a bit out of positioning here. He should, I mean, obviously this is very quick. Like the adds have literally just spawned. He should ideally be on this side to drag this add right here through into the frontal breath, right? And then we can CC them and make sure they all get hit. This is now going to be active. Oh, I mean, to be fair, Insane Typhoon, and it's inside the circle, but these lines are a bit finicky. That should hit that mob, but it doesn't. So yeah, that was unfortunate. Insane Typhoon, insane. The thought was there, but yeah, that's how you play this boss. Healers, you want to pretty much dispel these debuffs on cooldown. They do increase the haste and therefore damage of the person that has the debuff, but you don't want to get it, don't want to let it get out of hand. And also once it's dispelled, it deals AoE damage. So just make sure everybody's topped before that. But if you leave it on people, it depends really how confident you are as a healer. If you leave it on people, it can get out of hand pretty quickly. And then if you get targeted by the anchor shot, as I'm about to here, just use a defensive for that because that deals a lot of damage and also pulls you in. So be careful where it pulls you into because you don't want it to pull you into a fire swirly and end up dying like I do. So that's the second boss dealt with. Now we're into the last area. These Starseers are going to be your priority kill mob until they cast Wandering Pulsar, which is then going to spawn a Wandering Pulsar ad that you need to focus down. We were super unfortunate with the positioning and spawning of this ad, so it was all the way up here. So you need to go and kill these pulsars immediately because they're just going to constantly pulse horrible AoE damage to your whole group. Don't tank this boss on the stairs, or don't tank this mob on the stairs. Bit unfortunate that we had to run back up, but obviously it makes this drifting star frontal much harder to see. And then these ritualists, which you can see down here, they're going to spam cast Hyperlight Bolt, which you can send spare kicks into, but they're also going to do a unstable rift cast, which will just basically one-shot your whole group if that is allowed to go off. So make sure that you save a kick for this unstable rift. That needs to be kicked. And if there's like a few of them in the same pack, then try and assign kicks because this ability cannot go off. So let's move on to the last boss then. What you want to do is tanks aggro the boss and then drag it over to this corner. She's then going to spawn adds, and they'll spawn nice and neatly stacked onto the boss if you're in between this cart here and this wall. And then they'll also TP away and try to cast Shuriken Blitz. So this means that they will also, I think they can only TP away within their line of sight. So they're going to teleport back here, and then ranged, all you want to do is just make sure to kick these adds back in and then cleave them down. They should only ever get like one attempt at a cast off, but just make sure they're kicked. Like they just fell over there. That didn't even happen. So then Collapsing Star is going to go out. My recommendation here would be healers deal with a Collapsing Star. Then you know when the damage is going to go out, so you can hot people up, or you can make sure that everybody is healthy before you then step into the next Collapsing Star to reapply the dot to everyone, and then just repeat, rinse and repeat, right, and heal through that outgoing damage. Then the boss is going to phase at 40% and fire these arrows through people that are going to destroy these glyphs. you need to make sure that this is done in one phase. So just assign one player to each of these stars and make sure that the red arrow is going through them, and use a defensive when this goes out as well, because this Hyperlight Jolt actually really does hurt. So use a defensive here. I should have used like a... Oh, I used my Shield of Vengeance. So yeah, that was fine. Then that leaves a dot on everyone. And then for the second phase, tanks will want to position the boss out here, because he's going to do energy fragmentation, which is going to fire that bolt into the glyphs around the room, which is then going to fire all of these different like sparks out. So being all the way over here in this corner just gives you the maximum amount of time that you can possibly get to dodge these, because they never spawn, or the glyphs never end up over here. So this is the closest one, and we still have all of that travel time to actually dodge those spears that are fired out. So that is Salia's Gambit. Let's move on to Streets. So we have this first pool where we've got the Gate Warden. Just make sure to use a... I mean, in higher keys, you're going to need to use a defensive for the Radiant Pulse that goes off. It's coming in 5 seconds. It's going to deal AoE damage to your group, leaving a dot. It also does it from the first mini-boss as well. It's not too bad here, and I don't think I really need to pop a defensive on this kind of key level. But in higher keys, it's going to start chunking. So just be wary of that. On these future pools, these mobs, these officers are going to start with a hard light barrier on them, which is going to reflect damage. So if you're a purge class, make sure that you're purging. As you can see, I consume the magic off of that, so that gets rid of that debuff. And then just make sure that you kick the hard light barriers in future, because we don't want all of our damage reflected back onto us. It's just like it can very quickly one-shot you without you expecting it. Then I think it's the Overseers are going to do the Beam Splicer. So tanks, just make sure to kite away from these Beam Splicers. As you can see here, these lines, these beams, apply a horrible dot if you come into contact with them. The best way to stop this happening is tanks can kind of carry here and just move these mobs away gradually, so that you're not even within range of them and nobody can end up killing themselves with them. And then just before the first boss, you're going to have this mini boss, not the boss, so don't pop Bloodlust here. I feel like that's probably going to happen a lot in lower keys, as people are going to think this is the boss, but it's not. This mini boss is going to do again the same Radiant Pulse, which is coming up now. This one seems to hit a bit harder, I believe, so just use defensives here if you need to. But as you can see, in a +10, it's not doing too much. So then let's move on to the first boss. Tanks, when the boss buffs itself with fully armed, it's going to increase its physical damage done by 25%. So just make sure to use defensives here and big mitigation. Just be wary, or just be like ready for it at least, right? As you can see, this fully armed is going out there. So now Amar should just use some form of defensive to mitigate the extra incoming damage. Then when you get targeted with interrogation, which is on me right now, you're just going to want to run as far away as you can from the boss as possible. And also in higher keys, you're likely going to want to pop a defensive as well. The ticking damage is actually pretty nasty while you're in the cage. And then because you created all this distance, the rest of your group is now going to want to swap and nuke you down as fast as they can. But because you're so much further away, it gives them a lot more time to do that. Other players should also just be careful when this interrogation goes off, not to get caught in front of the whirling blades, because that is actually going to be able to hit anyone. So just be wary of that. Let's carry it on then. So as we come down these stairs, we'll start with the right side, we'll cover the left side later. These wise guys are going to cast Hyperlight Bolt, I think on random players now. I think it used to be on just the tank, but I think it goes out on everyone now. So just kick this. This is your only kick in this area. So make sure that these abilities are stopped. Healers, these smugglers are going to apply Hyperlight Bombs to players, so just keep on top of dispels here. As you can see, one's gone on me right now, so that's going to get dispelled very briefly, I'm sure. If it doesn't get dispelled, then players commit defensive and also run away from the rest of your team, or just like loosely spread, because you don't want to cleave that extra damage onto everyone. And then if you do end up pulling this patrolling muscle, tanks, just be very wary here. They're going to buff themselves with Chrono Light Enhancer, so just use big mitigation if you're going to face tank that, or just kite away, because they're going to reduce their movement speed while dealing 100% increased damage. And that's going to hurt a lot, especially with the Hyperlight Backhand. But I mean, honestly, you don't even really need to pull these muscles, so I don't know if they're actually efficient % or not, but tanks, just be wary with these mobs. Then let's skip over to the mail room. We'll come back to the gauntlet in a second. So there's a high chance that you'll do a massive pull here, where the tank will run in and pull everything for you and then pull him outside, because that stops these mobs from doing this open cage. But I think they, well, I think they actually still do it over here, but because you're so far away from the chickens, they don't actually end up stunning you. But if these open cages do go off on the ones that are near, you do actually want to stop these. So as you can see, I stopped that with a fell eruption, which if that did go off, even though we're like line of sighted around here, I think because that cage is so close, the chickens do come out and start stunning everybody. So just be wary that you do need to stop the open cage on the nearby sorters. So just have one DPS like I did just there, go in and stun or disorient the sorter that's doing that, and then nuke down this pack without any stuns going out. Then we're going to come back to the gauntlet for efficiency. Now this is the second part of the gauntlet where it's going to spawn an overseer and the strong arms. Tanks, this is all on you, okay? The strong arms hit the tank like a truck because of their static mace and static cling debuff that they apply. And the overseers are going to apply a pierce debuff, which increases physical damage taken by 25%. So tanks, be very ready with a big mitigation while fighting these packs, because you can very easily fall over. Let's move over to the Oasis then. Tanks, use big mitigation for the security slam. That actually chunks you, especially if they go off at the same time. And the rest of your group is just going to want to kick the menacing shouts. That's pretty much it for the trash here. And then once Zogron comes out, again, tanks, be wary with the security slam that he does. When suppression spark comes in, make sure that it only really matters at the end of the cast, but make sure at the end of the cast that you're not on top of the boss, because if everybody's on top of the boss, you're all going to cleave each other with that circle and kill each other. Then final warning, when this comes out, you're going to still want to look out for the notes on the floor. So as you can see, the notes spawn there, I slide through. That's going to keep up my up tempo buff, which is going to increase my damage by a hell of a lot and make burning this shield down a lot easier so that we don't wipe to final warning going off. Also, during this whole phase, make sure that you're not standing in the rotten food swirlies, especially while, like, I don't know, I do feel like they are quite hard to see sometimes. So I just wanted to make a point of that, especially while like suppression spark is going out. That can easily get you killed. Let's move over to the left side then. This is from a hard mode that we did. So you're obviously going to have to stay inside the circle while fighting this mini boss. She's going to put beam splicers out, so tanks just gradually kite the boss away from them so that the beam splicers like aren't even really in the circle. Then we're going to fight these core hounds. Make sure to kick that ancient dread. You do not, that's the only cast here, so you do not want this going off. And then down the bottom here, this dire horn, where are you? There you are. So there, it's going to do a frenzied charge. Whoever gets targeted by this, stand still, maybe pop a defensive in higher keys, and it's also going to stun you. And then it's going to swiftly follow with a wild thrash, which is going to deal a lot of damage to anyone within 8 yards. So if you're on top of the dire horn during that cast, which I think I'll be able to show here, there, use a defensive, like we used a darkness there for that. It actually does a lot of damage in higher keys. So you could also just stay away from the dire horn for that, which is probably going to be the play. But as a melee, you can mitigate that damage with a defensive. So Postmaster then, he's going to spawn multiple swirlies. If you can, soak these swirlies, but only soak one. You only want to soak one at a time because it does apply a nasty debuff that can get out of hand if you stand in, like, sometimes these puddles spawn and overlap each other, like you can see in the back there. Be careful with getting too many stacks of the debuff because it can actually end up hurting. Fan mail is where you want to use defensives. This absolutely chunks. As you can see, I've used blur for it. Money order, you should be fine not to use a defensive as long as everybody's stacked inside it, so that's fine there. And then when the unstable goods come out, just make sure that you don't miss. That's pretty much all there is to it, and make sure that all of the bombs are disposed of. But yeah, the only thing that can really hurt you here is if you miss, so don't let that happen. These Peacekeepers, when you pull a lot of Peacekeepers at the same time, it can get pretty sketchy. They do a charge to anyone further than 10 yards. So make sure everybody stacks in melee for when fighting these Peacekeepers. Stop the phalanx field. But if you have like one range that's out by themselves, all of these Peacekeepers could quelling strike them at the same time. And you saw like JK Low almost died to, I think, only just one of them going out there. So everybody stack in melee when you're fighting these. Then on the Grand Menagerie, on the Grand Consumption that's about to go out now, remember where the safe spaces are. Let the first explosion go off and then move back into where the first explosion was. That's all that there is to that. And then we actually found some really nice position. I mean, it's not like new tech. Everyone sort of knows this. But tank Acolyte in this corner, because then whoever has Gluttony on them for the venting protocol that's going off right now, it just makes it so much easier because the orbs are all clumped up in one space. It also makes dodging easier for everybody else, but look how much easier that is to just like run over all of these all of these orbs. I'm already at like 14 stacks here. And then also when the boss dies, just have him in this corner. And again, makes it super nice to just pick up these orbs from whoever's got gluttony on them. And you can tank the boss near them to make it easier for melee to do so as well. And do not underestimate this Whirling Annihilation pull-in because it does yoink you in. So don't, because as soon as you come into contact with that, you're dead. But again, yeah, look how easy this is for me to just pick up all of these orbs. Lovely stuff. Then the last area, you've got the Spark Casters. Spare kicks go into Scintillate from them, but save a kick for their Hyperlight Salvo, which is going out now. And then this Force Multiplier that goes out from the Enforcer. If you've got a Soothe class, just Soothe the Enforcer and it will soothe everything. If not, then you're going to need to be more on top of your kicks because this is a scary damage buff. But if you do have a Soothe class, just Soothe the Enforcer as soon as that goes off. Bad Seb. He's not doing it. Then ideally you would skip this last mini boss. What you can do is sort of jump on this wall and you can actually click this while on this wall without actually aggroing the mini boss. But this is just dodge the shock mines and then whoever has lethal force, just make sure that you don't get pulled into each other. But also make sure that you're never like stood on the other side of a shock mine before the lethal force is going out, because if you're unlucky and you get yoinked together, it's going to yoink somebody through that shock mine, okay? So make sure you're not doing that. Oh, nothing to see there. Let's move on to Soasmi then. Maybe in high keys, you'd want to use a defensive for the face slash that goes out here. This applies a dot to everyone that does actually hurt, as you can see. And then constantly be aware of where these pairs are ready for the Shuri that goes out. So as you can see, square, square. So we're just going to go here. That'll be fine. I guess I waited for the triangle instead. I just didn't see the square in time. But yeah, this is going to be more so important when the boss divides the arena up later because it's going to make it a lot trickier to actually get to where you want to be. And then for the double technique, you're going to need to kick this ability twice to actually stop it. But note that this cast time is actually shared. So you want to get the first kick off early because if you don't kick, let's say, I think it's a 10-second cast. If you don't kick until 9 seconds on the first kick, the second kick is going to be 1 second and it's pretty much going to go off immediately. So that can cause wipes there. So just wanted to let you guys know that. Get that first kick off early or just have everybody kick at the last second, right? The boss isn't going to do anything else while the double technique is casting. So if you can delay your kick, that is going to benefit you as well. Alrighty then, let's move on to Halls of Atonement. So if you're on a class like a Demon Hunter or something that can like trap or sap, what you could ideally do is imprison or stop this Houndmaster in its tracks at the start. Be careful of getting aggro of this Dark Blade. But if you stop that, it just makes the pathing better for later in case you need to come back this way, right? So then you're going to do a big pull at the start to get Bloodlust on cooldown. Use defensives when the Thrash goes off from the Shard. That's going to be the biggest outgoing damage in this phase. Make sure you kick the Collectors on their Collect Sin cast as well. That's your priority kick, and then any spare kicks can go into these Wicked Bolts. Now, healers, you'll need to prioritize dispelling the Mark of Obliterations here. These don't do any damage until they explode, so you have the whole 12-second duration to dispel this, so be very on the trigger with your dispels. And spare dispels can go into the tank when they have high stacks of this Armor Tainted debuff, because that's going to make them take a lot more damage and potentially kill them. Dispelling is a big thing, especially when you're pulling multiple collectors, which you do, obliterators, sorry, which you do in these larger pools, because multiple of these marks are going to be going out at the same time. And then when these groundskeepers get low, make sure that you CC them, because they will start running off once they get to 30% HP, and that can easily ninja pull like this bat over here or other mobs later in the dungeon. So kick the Siphon Life. Again, you want to make sure that that is stopped, because that is going to heal the mob and also deal big damage. The only other mobs in this area to take note of are these Houndmasters. They're going to be your focus mob. You want to kill those Houndmasters off, because they're going to make the Gargans take less damage. And also make sure that you kick their Loyal Beast cast, because that is going to buff up the Gargans massively. But that's it for the first area. So let's move on to the first boss then. And what you're going to want to do is stack up all of these debris pools next to each other. So Heave Debris and Crumbling Slam. Make sure that all of these debris pools that they leave after they've gone out are stacked up nice and neatly. And then as the boss is approaching 100 energy, not when it's reaching 100 energy, as it's approaching it, tanks, you want to start kiting the boss out ready for the beam. Because if the beam starts to be channeled now, we wouldn't have any, the beam cast goes on for so long that we would inevitably end up having to run it into this debris. And that's the only real way that you're going to die on this fight, which, I mean, I think there's a slither of space behind here. But ideally we would have this boss further out so that we can dodge the whole way around the boss without any problems. It's a bit light in my room, so I can't really see. We're all right. Then we're going to move over to the second area. Tanks, this is a scary area for you. These mortal strikes hurt, but they are also going to stack a healing reduction received debuff on you. So think about mitigating this damage, as you're not going to be able to heal it up. Once you've got 3 of these debuffs on you, you're not going to be doing any healing. So mitigate the damage instead and kite if you need to. These ankle biters are also no joke. They are only smallies, but this bleed they stack up on your whole group. It is also a stacking bleed. Is no joke. It hurts a lot, and you're going to want to commit defensives if you get multiple stacks of this. This is only a +9, but in higher keys this is going to start trucking you down, believe me, especially when coupled with the eviscerators later in this pack that just do random AoE damage. If you've got a lot of the bleeds already on you and you're starting to tick low and then they just hurl a glaive out, you're gonna end up dying. It's happened many a time. Let's move on to the second boss then. Not ideal that we pulled a slasher onto this because it makes it a bit less clear for you. You're not going to have this slasher on the boss. Stone Cool's going to go out, and you're going to want to stack up these small adds as best you can on top of each other. So you're going to want to kick these mobs in. Abilities like Sigil of Chains, Mass Grip, Sigil of Silence, Challenging Disrupting Shout are very good at clumping these mobs up together because they're just going to spam cast Villainous Bolt on random players. So kick these abilities as they're going off as well, because if you've got like 3 going out here on one person, that is a recipe for disaster. And then as you're nuking these adds down, the boss is going to cast Flesh to Stone on someone, which is going to stun them after a few seconds. He's then going to follow this up with a Stone Shattering Leap. And during this cast, whoever is targeted by the Flesh to Stone is going to get stunned. So before you get stunned by this Flesh to Stone, which maybe happens when you get to 4 stacks, but basically just like halfway through this cast, pop a defensive before the Stone Shattering Leap finishes, because you're not going to be able to, for the most part, while you're stunned by the Flesh to Stone, because this leap is going to hurt and also apply a horrible, nasty dot to that player that is, or any players that are in this circle when the leap actually goes off. The player targeted by this is also going to need to position themselves on top of the adds that we've killed before the end of the cast. Ideally, you want to be positioned on top of the dead adds, like before halfway into this cast, right? Before you get stunned, because then you're not going to be able to move, and then you're not going to kill the adds. The adds are going to respawn, and it's just going to make this boss fight hell. But as you can see, that dot goes out. That dot actually trucks, so make sure that you're mitigating that with a defensive. So that's the second boss done. The pull after this, again, very scary for the tanks. You've got Houndmasters here that are going to buff up the Gargans. Gargans just slap by themselves anyway, but you also have the Mortal Strike debuff coming out from the Reaver. So just make sure you're on top of your mitigation here, because healing up the damage that you're taking isn't always going to be viable because of that Mortal Strike debuff that's going to be going out. So just kite if you need to here, tanks. This is a very scary pull for you. Moving over to this third boss then, just be aware throughout the fight which lanterns are still active so that you can pre-position yourself ready for the ad that spawned. You can see here that only these 2 lanterns are still active. So if I was on this side, it would just mean extra ticking damage if I had to then run over to the side with the actual lantern. So just keep an eye out where they are. And then also, if there is an ad out while you're targeted by these red circles deal ticking damage, so loosely spread here. But use the defensive if the ad is out at the same time, because as you can see, I'm getting chunked down very quickly there, and healers make sure to dispel one player very quickly too. Let's truck onto this mini boss then. At these lower keys, I'm not sure how it's going to play out in higher keys as of just yet, but in these lower keys, all we're doing is just focusing down this mini boss and just burning it through. It's going to get some Dark Communion heals off, but you're going to kill it, in a quick enough time that it's worth it to just continue to focus down this mini boss. When this Dispersed Sin goes out, it's going to show large red circles towards the end of it as it's about to drop off. Now, make sure to spread out with these. This debuff is actually going to increase your damage while it's active, but it will explode for big damage when the debuff falls off. So make sure that when these red circles appear, you just all spread away from each other as to not one-shot and kill your whole group. Also, try and get everybody to stack on the mini boss here, because it's just going to make cleaving down the ads a lot easier. They fixate on random players, so if you've got like a ranged out here, they're just going to get wailed on by this ad, and nobody's going to really be able to do anything about it efficiently. So just all stack up here, dodge the pulls on the floor, and then cleave the ads down passively as you're nuking down Cigar. Then for the last boss, not too much to note that's going to like specifically kill you. Just make sure that all of the beams on this Ritual of Woe cast are soaked, okay? So have maybe ping or, yeah, maybe ping before where you're going to be standing. I think maybe on this right side, that's going to go off. And then as you can see, it's pulsing a lot of AoE damage before someone gets in the way of it. But also use defensives when the beam is on you, because it does a lot of single target damage as well. So that is Halls of Atonement done. Let's move on to the final dungeon then, which is going to be Echo Dome Aldani. Again, massive pull at the start where we're going to get Bloodlust on cooldown. The main aim here is to let your tank get aggro of everything. All of these mobs are very spread out, so it is a hard pull to set up, especially if you're not on like particular tanks, right? The main aim of this first fight is to kick these gorges. There's going to be a few of these overgorged mites in here. And if any of these gorge casts go off, this debuff they already have on them is going to stack up. And when these mobs die, they're going to explode and put a stacking dot for every single buff that they have active on the whole party. That is going to chunk your whole party down. So they do start with one of these buffs as is anyway. So when they die, healers are going to have to be prepared to heal through that damage. And maybe you'll need to use a defensive. But you will definitely need to use a defensive if you haven't been kicking these gorges, because it's going to, I think it applies like 4 stacks of the debuff for every 1 stack that they have. So just make sure that these gorges are kicked. That's pretty much it for this first pull though. Just focus down this destroyer, and tanks be careful with the incoming damage, especially when the mobs get low. So let's move over. These are all the same mobs. Let's move over to the first boss. Try and get everybody to stack up for the invading shriek so that the mobs clump up on top of each other and you can efficiently cleave them down. And then when the toxic regurgitation comes out, try and stack them ideally away from the boss so that you can have time to cleave the ads down later during the devour, but don't stand on top of each other for them. And then during the devour phase, which is coming up now, hard swap to the ads, focus them down while CCing them, do not let them touch the boss. But also a surprising amount of healing needs to be done here. So healers, this is a bit of a healing check for you. So just keep on top of your healing while the boss is devouring, and all of your DPS just nuke down these ads. In this second area then, tanks are going to need to be very wary of these sentinels. They're going to do an arcane slash on you. Stay still with this arcane slash because it does follow you and you can't dodge it. There is some tech, but I'll cover that in a separate video. So mitigate this damage and stay still while everyone else avoids this. Spare kicks can go into the Ritualists on these arcane bolts, but your priority kick here is the arcing zap. It's basically the arcane bolt, but it just hits like a total of 3 targets instead, I'm pretty sure. So make sure that your priority kicks are on that. As you can see, I just kicked that then. Tanks, also be wary of these phase blades. They're going to buff themselves and deal a lot of damage to you, especially when there's multiple of them, as you can see with this buff here. So this can be soothed off, or sorry, this can be purged. Maybe I could have used my arcane torrent here. But tanks, just make sure to mitigate that incoming damage. That's it for this second area, so let's move over to the second boss. When these binding javelins go out, whoever is targeted by them, don't stack on top of each other. Everyone else avoid these circles because you'll get tethered, whoever is in this circle. But use a defensive and then nuke these spears down ASAP. They do increasing ramping damage, so use a defensive, and these are your priority targets as soon as they come up. On the intermission, when he goes into the Arcane Blitz, make sure that you're not cleaving each other with the Warp Strikes. You can see where the line is for these Warp Strikes, so make sure that it's going through the boss to get rid of its incorporeal stacks, but make sure not to stand on each other because you're going to stack up multiple of these dots, which is going, like you can already see that it's hurting a little bit. So a lot of these, or more than one of these Warp Strike debuffs is going to start trucking you down. And then once it gets back into the phase and both of the bosses are active, they basically take double damage here because they share health. So pop your offensive cooldowns here and nuke them down. After this, we're going to do another big pull here. Your priority kill target is this pack speaker. It's going to do an erratic ritual, which is going to deal a large amount of party-wide damage. So use defensives for that as well. You probably just want to use defensives here anyway because there's so much outgoing damage for this pull. So stay on top of your kicks here for the Ritualist. Make sure to kick their Arcane Bolts. As you can see, the Mage is going to get super low here, almost dies because an Arcane Bolt goes out on him. At the same time as, I guess the Erratic Ritual, like that was just a combo of that damage. Healers, be prepared for the Erratic Ritual as well. That ability is no joke. And then as these pack speakers get lower, they are going to summon this spirit with Consumer Spirit. They're going to take 0 damage right now. That's why they're graded out on the plates profile, link in the description. But focus down this spirit, and then as soon as this spirit is dead, the pack speaker is going to take 30% increased damage. So jump back on the pack speaker and nuke that off so that you reduce the amount of erratic rituals that are going out. So that is pretty much it for this final area. There are burrowing creepers as well that patrol underground, but you want to avoid those for the most part. If you do pull them, then use a defensive for their stinging sandstorm, because that's going to deal a large amount of damage over the debuff's duration. But let's move on to the last boss now. Basically, the only thing that's going to get you killed here is not collecting your soul before the boss's ability hits them. So whether that's a ceremonial dagger right now, whether that is the Dread of the Unknown, which is about to come out, make sure you collect your soul first before the boss hits it. This Dread of the Unknown is probably the place that I would press a defensive. This circle does actually hurt. So as you can see, a lot of people did get low there. So in a higher key, that is definitely going to chunk. And all the other abilities in this fight, you can just dodge. So yeah. And then when it comes to Eternal Weave, you might want to save your cooldowns for Eternal Weave, because you can get 3 stacks of the damage increase if you pick up all of your souls here. And that's going to last for 10 seconds, which is a hefty damage increase. I think it's like a 30% damage increase. So if you can line up your cooldowns here, then do so. But that is it. That is all of the hardest areas of every single dungeon in Season 3 for Mythic Plus covered, and how to deal with them so that you guys stop bricking and wiping your keys and start timing some keys and get some big score. So I appreciate this is going to be a long video. This is 2 hours of me recording now. I'm going to need to lie down after this. So if you guys could leave a like for the hard work that has gone into this video, I would appreciate it. Also, leave a comment while you're down there as well for the algo, and subscribe to your boy. And until next time, I'll catch you guys later.